Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the Americas and around the world. I am Dr. Yael Danieli, founder and executive director of the International Center for Multigenerational Legacies of Trauma, or ICMGLT for short. The ICMGLT is headquartered where the Lenape lived before and during colonizations of the Americas. We recognize these indigenous peoples of Manhattan, their displacement, dispossession, and continued presence. Colonialism has had profound historical and ongoing impacts on the indigenous peoples of the Americas and others, of course, affecting their environments, economic stability, education, health and well-being, cultures, and political power. Identified as a direct cause of underdevelopment, colonialism has resulted in poverty, lack of opportunities, marginalization, violence, ill health, loss of cultural knowledge, and reduced life expectancy. This ICMGLT, first in a formal series of multi-generational webinars of colonialism, will describe indigenous peoples' multi-generational genocidal oppression by, as well as struggle against, the forces of colonialism and underdevelopment in the Americas, or few of the countries or the lands of the Americas, in the Americas. It follows the 21st session of the Permanent Forum of Indigenous Issues that took place 25 April to 5 May 2022. Your moderator, me, I'm a clinical psychologist, a victimologist, a psychohistorian, and a traumatologist. And this webinar, like all of our activities, are the fulfillment of a lifelong dream. We do have some technical issues. For example, Fernanda just is awaiting connection, but we will proceed knowing that these are modern challenges. Today's first speaker is Dr. Mary Fabry, who is a co-chair of the ICMGLT's working group on indigenous issues. She is a clinical psychologist whose career has focused on the treatment of torture survivors and training local providers in post-conflict settings to care for victims of human rights violations. She currently lives in Chenil, Arizona, on the Navajo Nation. Our second presenter, who may be third because of the connection issues, is Dr. Fernanda Friso Bragato. She's full professor of law at Untitled Law School in Brazil. Fernanda conducts research and publishes articles on human rights theory, decolonial thinking, and indigenous rights. Since 2015, Her work has focused on indigenous land rights or conflicts in Brazil in the context of risk for atrocities. Third or second will be Ms. Adela Begay. Adela has been an active advocate for community health and environmental justice for more than 25 years. She serves as the board president for the Citizens Against Running Our Environment, or CARE, a grassroots organization that seeks to empower, give voice to, and protect the interests of the Navajo communities. Adela has degrees in nursing and community health and retired in 2016 as the Director of Public Health Nursing from the central part of the Navajo Nation. Next is Dr. Juan Almendarez Bonilla. Juan is a Honduran physician, a human rights activist, and human rights defender. He is the founder and former executive director of the Center for the Prevention, Treatment, and Rehabilitation of Victims of Torture and their families, and former rector of the National Autonomous University of Honduras. His research and writings have ranged from medicine to social sciences to ecological issues. Dr. Francisco Rosado May is a Yucatec Maya. He holds a PhD in biology from the University of California, Santa Cruz. His research has focused on agroecological principles applied to the design and management of sustainable food systems with an intercultural approach. He is the founding president of the Universidad Intercultural de Quintana Roo, where students and applied to several where an intercultural educational model was successfully developed for Yucatec Maya students and applied to several scientific areas. We are blessed that many of our presenters today serve on the advisory council of the International Center for Multigenerational Legacies of Trauma. Now, I hope Fernanda will manage to join us, but we will accommodate as we always have. As you see—
Well, I'm here.
Oh, how wonderful, she's here. You see, we overcome.
I heard all the presentation. I could manage to be in time.
Thank you, darling. Thank you. I'm so glad. So here we are, so multidisciplinary of all of us. We have about an hour and a half for the webinar, though we have been known to run over time. Each speaker will present for about 12 minutes. Following an interchange among us, I will open the floor to questions or brief comments from the virtual audience. Panelists will then conclude with last words, and I will conclude by announcing our future webinars. Please use the chat function, and we'll do our best to respond to as many as we can. Feel free to direct your questions to a particular panelist or to the full panel. I give the screen to Mary, so Dr. Mary Fabry. Mary, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Yael. And I just would like to thank Yael and the Center for pulling together this presentation and great list of panelists. I would also like to acknowledge, as Yael said, that I live in Chinle, Arizona on the Navajo Nation, and that's where I'm speaking to you from. I'm going to share my screen, hopefully successfully.
Mhm.
Let's see. Let me get it up to size. Oops. I can't get it to open up bigger. There we go. All righty, and let me do the slideshow. There we go. Okay. All right. So my presentation is to give a context for really how colonialism has created dependency and multi-generational trauma for the First Nations. And our speakers are going to talk specifically about how that has played out in certain areas. So I would like to go to my first slide. Whoops, there we go. And I also want to acknowledge that a lot of the thought process I want to attribute to Maria Gagné, who's a sociologist in Canada, who wrote a book called Nation Within Nation, Dependency and the Cree, which she really closely worked and immersed herself into the Cree community and came up with this very insightful diagram that illustrates the process that trauma is passed on through generations from the seed of colonialism. And you can see in the middle is colonialism, and then how its implements created socioeconomic dependency and political dependency through legislation that implemented extraction and residential schools. And then as a result of that, the pain and grief and restrictions, oppression that resulted can lead to alcoholism and substance abuse, family violence, death, other abuses, and a very deep-seated cultural bereavement. So if we look at just what dependency is, how does it occur? Dependency occurs when an economy of a group of countries, or say tribal communities, are subjected to the development expansion that benefits another economy, a dominant economy. So you can see how that description fits in with tribal nations and colonialism. What happens then, though, is this dependency alters the internal structures of those less developed economies, essentially. And so there's shifts that take place, and losses and adjustments and modifications that take place. So for example, in the economic traditions of tribal communities, it wasn't based on employment by a corporation. So a lot of the extractive energy efforts are implemented by corporations, which creates jobs and then creates dependencies on that income to support oneself and family. And then all the policies that get passed that support extraction and assimilation creates political dependency. So we look at that in tribal communities, and we see that there's unequal relationships, right? The corporations, the colonizers are those in power, and they are essentially dominating tribal communities and imposing on them. And over that process, they introduced debt, first with the trading posts, right? There was not a cash economy in most tribal communities. And so the trading posts were developed, and there was bartering and credit that then led to having this sense of debt. Then laws are passed to impose assimilation. So in March of 1819, the US Civilization Act, which was passed in the government of James Monroe, implemented funds that would go towards Indian boarding schools. So we all know that that led to children being forcibly removed from their families and communities and having very restrictive policies about not being able to speak their language, having their hair cut, essentially a form of cultural genocide. In Canada, the Gradual Civilization Act of 1857 did a similar thing. It imposed restrictions or requirements of how an Indigenous person could attain equal rights. And essentially it was by assimilating into the dominant culture. Now, out of both of those acts, residential schools were formed. And in between 1869 and 1960, so almost 100 years, Indian children were either forcibly or sort of, I guess not forced, but families thought it was the best thing for their children to be educated by the dominant culture. So anyway, the residential schools were formed. And what we've learned very recently through the commission reports that have come out is that they were not great places for children, and that have created a lot of problems. So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada in December 2015 came out with their initial report, which then led to more investigation. And the report came out last year in May. That over 6,000 students died while in attending these schools, and over 750 unmarked graves have been found. The purpose of the commission was to create a historical account, and now they're working on healing and reconciliation between Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people for the cruelty and abuse that occurred in the residential schools. Just this month, the Federal Indian Board School Initiative report, which was released by the Department of the Interior, headed by Deb Holland. And in their report, they discovered that 408 boarding schools existed in 37 states and were staffed and funded by religious institutions. So again, there was a very strict, punitive system set up, and that often the students were forced into labor on the grounds. If they did not comply with the requirements of never speaking their language, of cutting their hair, of dressing in Western clothes, they would be punished. Solitary confinement, flogging, whipping, and withholding of food were common practices. So very, very tragic and saddening for all of us to learn these kinds of facts, to have them documented and proof presented. Also recently, the United Nations Forum on Indigenous Issues had their meeting in New York in April, at the end of April and May. They focused on extraction policies, and what they've said is that extractive operations around the world too often take place on Indigenous lands and without consent. This causes irreparable harm to Indigenous communities, to their livelihoods, to their cultures, language, and daily lives. And it is something that is needing examination and reconsideration of how it should be handled. So from these brief facts, we can see that colonialism leads to dependency. It has imposed legislation about land resources and rights. It has imposed the cruel and punitive residential schools. often leading to this alcohol and substance abuse and addiction issues, child abuse, sexual abuse, the family violence, accidental death, the cultural bereavement that comes from losing one's sense of identity and culture and belonging. So you can imagine with all this, there's going to be issues around trauma and mental health. And colonialism is, in fact, a social determinant of health. It is multi-generational in that it is with the roots of colonialism. It's created many trauma over many generations. The ongoing traumatic events experienced by Indigenous communities and their families it's a list, a brief list of interpersonal and domestic violence, shootings, stabbings, beatings, accidents, suicides, especially suicides. It's horrific, the amount of youth suicides in Indigenous communities. Murders and disappearances are getting more attention. And then as a result, we have high levels of PTSD, depression, anxiety, suicide, substance abuse, soul wounds around the cultural bereavement, and frozen grief where there's no process to, no means to process that grief. And again, just to mention the impact of COVID on Indigenous communities. So just in closing, for tribal communities, multiple generations have continuously been exposed since the beginnings of colonialism, traumatic experiences. And we have to remember that it's multidimensional. It isn't just about culture, it's economic, social, cultural, and political, creating dependencies that has been across multiple generations. Thank you very much. I'll turn it over to our next presenter.
Thank you very much, Mary, for giving such the comprehensive context. Our next two presenters will go to the land. The first, Fernanda from Brazil, about land rights. Then Adela, Navajo, about, in my mind, with the rape of the land or what colonialism still does to the land. Fernanda, the screen is yours.
Thanks very much, Ayal. Thanks very much for organizing this amazing webinar. I'm so glad to be here. And I'm sorry for joining a bit late, but I'm traveling. I'm a bit far from home within Brazil, but I'm traveling to Mato Grosso do Sul. Mato Grosso do Sul is one state in Brazil where the colonialism is most still in place against indigenous communities. And my partner that took me in the airport got me there a bit late. So we were going to the Atiguaçu summit of the Guarani and Kiowa people, but we had to stop in the road and to come to another community called Guaiviri for me to join you and participate in the seminar, in this webinar. So I'm here in the house of an indigenous teacher that has a good internet connection, and Ms. Lane has just joined me to attend the seminar, to attend the webinar. She's here, very attentive for our conversation. And just to say, I've already prepared a presentation for this webinar, but as the circumstances changed and I'm here in the core of colonialism against indigenous peoples in Brazil, I think I would talk about how the colonialism works really in practice in this state against these communities. And I would like to just to introduce you, Ms. Lani, that I have just met, and she will talk a little words for you, and I'm going to translate. So, Ms. Lani, say hello for them and say Fala oi para eles e fala um pouco da terra Guaiviri.
O quê?
Fala um pouco da terra Guaiviri.
Hello.
Diz o seu nome.
Oi, meu nome é Mislaine.
E essa aqui, terra é essa aqui?
Como
é que é o nome dessa terra?
Guaivira?
Guaiviri?
Uhum.
É uma terra retomada? Quer falar da retomada?
Acho que não, eu não sabe qual história.
Ah, tá bom. Então, she's Miss Lane, and she lives here in Guaiviri. This is a indigenous traditional land that was retaken some years ago, like 15 years ago. And during the retaking of this land, claimed as traditional, their leadership, called Nísio Gomes, was killed by the farmers here. This area is surrounded by huge farms that grow corn, and like many other places in this state. So this state, the colonization of this state that is in the southwest of Brazil is very recent. It was like in the 40s, from the 40s on. So the indigenous communities started to be expelled from their lands that were cleaned up for the use of agribusiness in this state. So they were expelled, and they were removed to reservations that now are totally overcrowded. In these reservation has the highest rates of suicide amongst indigenous peoples and other people, and in general in Brazil. They face harsh conditions to get basic human rights, to access basic human rights, such as food, such as education. They live in very, very poor conditions here, in a very precarious conditions, being threatened by the farmers around them. So this land is claimed as traditional, as many others in this state. But the state did not end the process of demarcation, so as they are living in a very precarious condition. This situation is the same in this state for many other indigenous peoples. Guarani and Kiowa comprises more or less 40,000 people. They are the second largest indigenous peoples in Brazil, and they are living all day, every day, the legacies of colonialism, and the colonialism is still in place in this state. Their lands were taken not so far ago, and the government delivered these lands for farmers that in many cases got their ownership titles by fraud. And these people have been trying to retake their lands, especially since our constitution in 1988 that granted indigenous peoples the right to occupy, to live in the lands that they traditionally occupy. But many of them were out of their lands in the time of the constitution was promulgated, because they had been expelled for reservations and so on, but they never abandoned these lands. They always lived around the lands. And from 90s on, they started a process of retaking of their lands, with the support initially of the government that started the process of demarcation. But the reaction from the farms, from the political allies in this state was really strong and violent. So from 2000 to 2016, I personally analyzed 24 different attacks against these communities in different parts of this state in their attempt of retaking their lands. Many murders, rape, burning the houses, humiliation, forced eviction happened here. all these attacks can also fit into the concept of crimes against humanity against these people in Brazil. So they have been attacked, they have been expelled from their lands because of the economic interests in place here. And these farms are completely connected to global supply chains. So the soy, the corn, the cattle raised here are straight go to the supermarkets and so on in the global north. So all this global economy is, including in this very remote area, in very remote state in Brazil, are globally connected to economic interests. Apart from this, these people have been suffering a huge prejudice because of their race, because of their membership to these people. Even their identity is challenged by people that are living here now, saying that they are not Indians, they were never here, they are Paraguayans, because here in the border with Paraguay is just over there, it's just 1 kilometer there, and they say that they were never here, they just show up when the state started to be developed economically, and now they are trying to curb or to be an obstacle to economic development of this state. And the political and economical actors from that state react very, very violently against these people, and they have been living in a really, really harsh conditions here. So this is an example of how colonialism is still in place against indigenous peoples all around the world, and it's upheld by this. It's upheld by the same pillars in my view as the colonialism was upheld in the beginning of modernity. Like that is the idea of a racial superiority of someone against others. In this case, especially in Brazil, the whites against indigenous peoples and blacks. They think they are superior because of the white supremacy. It's also still in place here and all around the world. And also the economic interests, the interests over the resources and lands that these people still control or has the right to control. And I think my time is over. Yeah. So that's I'm sorry for speaking so chaotically, but I had prepared something, but I thought it would be much more interesting for the audience to know the situation that I've been here now. So thanks very much for the opportunity. Yeah.
With all our heart, and there's nothing to be sorry about. This is your life, day in, day out, and you know, you're one of our heroes. So just thank you again. And Adela, dear Adela, are you? Yes, you're with us. I believe we need the video to begin your presentation as well. Thank you. Adela, the screen is yours.
Okay, Yate, my name is Adela Begay. Tochanen sled last chi basis chin, my excuse me, that's a chedokia ani it nale. I live on the Navajo Reservation in the USA. The Navajo Nation is a large reservation. I think it is one of the largest. Our reservation extends into Arizona, Colorado, Utah, and New Mexico. The population of the Navajo is around 300,000, and only half live on the reservation. Others live off the reservation. We consider our homeland, which is Navajo, bordered by our sacred mountains, and we call those Sinachana and Tzadlej and Sled and the Bensa. And of course, we have other sacred mountains on the reservation. We are also bordered by two rivers, San Juan and Colorado. And we deem these as the mountains as well as the rivers and everything on our land, on our homeland, sacred, and that they should be revered and taken care of. So, as I said, we deem these very sacred and we depend on them, and they have provided for us. So during my
Were you talking?
yeah. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, we can hear you.
So I'm
I
sorry
was
about
muted out of respect. Go ahead.
Adela, maybe Adela, if you turn off video, the audio will work better.
No, it's okay.
It's just, okay.
Thanks, Mary.
So during my parents' lives and prior, daily prayers were practiced to all the deities, including the mountain, the trees, and all kinds of life forms. Frequent offerings were practiced, offering corn pollen, white corn, and precious minerals and stones to springs, trees, plants, and teachings of never taking more than you need, not to play or waste resources such as water, food, wildlife was practiced. However, in the 1980s in the US, many tribes were removed from their original homeland to other states such as Oklahoma. The Navajos, we were also removed in 1860 and were prisoners of war for about 4 years, and we finally came back to our original homeland after much prayers and pleading with the US. Of course, when we were removed, we had to have a treaty saying that we were
Adela, I think you're frozen. Just a moment.
So I was saying that can you hear me now?
Now we can.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just having issues with the video, I guess.
Well, that's to be
So
Mhm.
yeah, I was relating that after the 1860s, our leaders formed a treaty to so we could be moved back to our homeland. And in return, a lot of children age 6 or even younger were placed in boarding schools, and boarding schools away like in Kansas, California, Oregon, those places. And some of them returned home as a young adult. Some did not return home. Some lived on off the res. As you know, that it was brought out that in boarding schools, the children were told not to speak their language and they were told that seeing things or deeming things as sacred was backwards, and there was only one God, and to practice otherwise is sinful and wrong. So the disposition of the next spiritual values, cultural values, language began and continued for decades. Specific exploration of land and resources on our land started in the 1920s with the formation of the Navajo Tribal Council. The council were set up so they could approve the leases for mineral and resource for corporations. In the 1950s, some communities on Navajo were also again removed from their communities for corporations like power plants, oil and gas extraction, uranium extraction. And of course, the government ensures that the land remains dependent on them so they can have easy access to the natural resources. Most leadership on Navajo see the natural resources as commodities, means to get dollars and revenues. So at Diné, we have our fundamental law and natural law, which says that the earth, this is the earth and universal law, which tells us that they provide for us, and in return, we are to protect them, protect all life on this land and deem them sacred. And if we don't, we suffer the consequences. The consequences that we are experiencing is, like I said, we have 7 power plants within the last 50 years. We have oil and gas. We have helium extraction, uranium extraction. And the consequences we have now is we have poor air quality, a lot of pollution, water contamination from the industries, drought, and adverse health impacts such as respiratory, cardiac diseases, drug abuse, alcoholism, high suicide rates. And, but there is some hope. The hope is there are some universities now that have Native studies, and they are reteaching a lot of the Native language, the cultural and spiritual values. And many young people are receptive to it. We also have hopeful organizations that have been, we have more of them who are active in defending Mother Earth and restating or respecting the land by going back to farming. And one of the organizations that I belong to, Diné Care, we advocate and speak for nature and speak for our people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adela. Thank you for pointing out the hope at the end. Of course, the International Center is a strong supporter. And I remember your moving words when we spoke right after the beginning of COVID, about how, because of the conditions of the land, people couldn't even find clean water to wash their hands, while washing was one of the preventive measures. Thank you so much. And thank you very much also to moving on to the culture, the cultural dimension. Juan will indeed speak from Honduras about
Yes.
a particular community to and how its culture and multi-generational legacies have been affected. Please, Juan, the
Yes,
screen is yours. Hi.
thank you. Thank you very much. I am very pleased to be in this meeting, which is great contribution to the human rights, particularly for the indigenous people.
Mhm.
I am going to talk about a particular ethnic group. We have a ethnic group in one of the poorest countries in Latin America. And we have one of the highest rate of homicide, probably one of the highest in the world. We have a military and repressive government, a dictatorship that very recently, November last year, we have elections at the national level. And for the first time in the country, one woman was elected. And we are very happy about that. He is doing very high work on human rights. I'm going to talk about a story of the sexual abuse, and because we one of the highest violence of also on women, we have feminicide, almost one woman each 24 hours. And we are going to talk on one of the ethnic groups, Lenca groups, who have talking about a case of a patriarchal society, a military man who is very highly violent with his partner, an indigenous woman who is a member of the Indigenous Council and also a leader. Because this military man and now working with the security guard as a security guard, and he had been committed several situations of a violence with his partner. The daughter of this couple is also a police woman, but she is more close to her father. And because they have some privilege, they put in jail to her mother. And the mother had been traumatized by the father and the daughter because they had more power. So, but now she has to our center for solidarity, and we help her to get out of the police.
Mhm.
And now we present the case to the Human Rights Office of the government. And she is going to be with more security. However, the important situation for us is to do research in the future about the violence and the patriarchal behavior of the military police with the woman. And second, to do research on the multi-generation traumatization. But this also is supported by some hydroelectrical companies related to oligarchy and colonizer from Honduras and also from abroad. The importance of this work is now we are going to raise more consciousness about the police behavior and military police behavior also, because the impunity for militaries and police is almost 95%. So thanks for the contribution to this organization, and we are understanding better the importance of the multi-generation trauma, particularly in our society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Juan, for the very descriptive case. You shine light on not just on rules, but on the actual family and actual people. Francisco, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
We would like to see you too. Also,
Okay.
Juan, at some point, please show people your face. It's a wonderful face. So.
It doesn't look like my camera is working. Oh. Here it goes.
Okay, Francisco, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm going to start sharing my screen.
Mm-hmm.
Here it is. I hope you all see it. All right, here we are. All right, I'm going to talk about intercultural education, but I want to say a few words to provide a context for it. This model of education, we call it intercultural. I will explain what it is in a little bit. It's providing now a space for indigenous students who have been under colonialism, and when they go to a conventional university, not an intercultural university, they face conventional education, which is a reflection of also colonialism. It's not a model developed in our own country. Therefore, there are traumas. If I have a way of learning which is based on my culture, and I go to study under another model of learning, which is not from my culture, it creates trauma, for sure. In any event, please take a look at this chart. This intends to show the number of years in which the indigenous population has been learning and creating knowledge versus the number of years in which a different way of learning based on the scientific method is included in the new ways of learning, which is the basis for what we call conventional education. So, but in the year 2022 and a few years back, our communities are not specifically local communities, but global communities, meaning that there is a multicultural context in which now we are living, we indigenous people are living. It's a multicultural context. This is important to have into account. Anyway, in my home state, the state of Quintana Roo in Mexico, which is in the Yucatan Peninsula facing the Caribbean Sea, the students, when they are about to enter university level have different choices. One choice from 1991 to date is the University of Quintana Roo. It's like saying the University of Florida, the University of California, or something like that. And this is based on what we call conventional model that provides fellowships or quotas or special tutoring programs to increase the number of indigenous students going to this university. But in January 24, 2001, the Mexican government reformed the constitution. Now it's mandatory to offer a different way of education to indigenous people. And we call it intercultural education. Okay, this was the result of different struggles, especially the Zapatista uprising in Chiapas in 1994. To date, the students have basically three options. One option to go to university education is conventional, which is also the same model in which technological education is taking place. They have the intercultural university, and they have indigenous educational model, which is based on intraculturality. I'll go into it in a little bit. So anyway, it's conventional, it's intercultural, or it's intracultural, the model in which the students can attend higher education. In Mexico, there are now 15 states with an intercultural university. And as you can see, the color dots represent the different indigenous peoples, populations in the country. And you can see that in each of the, almost in each of the colors, there is an intercultural university over there. It's just an idea. I'm not going to go into details in this, but the point is that the country is moving into intercultural education as a way to provide higher education to indigenous peoples. And for that matter, it is important to notice also, based on the contribution by Malea and Young from Canada, which they wrote a book, Cultural Diversity, back in 1984, they used the concept of the centrifugal effect that explains how, because education, because policies, because politics, because migration, they all create a centrifugal effect, expelling from the center, from the core, from their own identity, the students. Okay? But at the same time, the same factors, education, policies, politics, migration, changing the approach can move to the other direction, moving from centrifugal effect to centripetal effect, meaning to make the students going back to the core, to their own identity, to their own culture. And it is all related to education. Again, let's not forget there is conventional education, which is mostly based on the scientific method, nothing about the local language, nothing about the local way of learning. There's intercultural education and there's intracultural education. The intracultural education, as it says, the name says, it is based only in the culture of the people. And it makes sense to have an intracultural education, a space in which I, as an indigenous person, can regain my own language, my own way of learning, my own traditions, blah, blah. But there is a problem with that. Okay? Now, for conventional, in a multicultural settings, mostly based on the scientific method, they have a tendency of homogenization. It loses diversity. They say, for instance, 2 + 2 is 4, no matter the culture, no matter the language. Yes, of course. but the process that happens in your mind to explain that four matters. For instance, in English, we say 2 times 2 equals 4. In Spanish, we say 2 por 2 igual a 4. You see the difference between English and Spanish? In Spanish, you are obliged to memorize, not to think about the process to explain that number 4. In English, you are pushed to think about that, where that 4 comes from. And we go into the Maya, and the Maya Cape, Yaba Cape, Inchat and Cape, it's the same thinking that is happening in English. It explains in my brain where that 4 comes from when I say 2 times 2. So if I have conventional education, which doesn't take care, doesn't incorporate my way of processing knowledge, it's moving me away from an opportunity to actually innovate. So a process matters. So it's not just to teach math without learning the process. Okay, and that's what intercultural education takes into account. And this slide shows it. If I have an intercultural education, of course, I get my core, my center, my indigenous identity strengthened. But from that core, if I go into conventional education based on the scientific method, I move away from my own indigeneity identity. I move away from it. The intercultural model of education draws the best from both ways of learning, from the local, intercultural, and the scientific method. That's how we create the intercultural educational model. Okay? And we have a working definition for that, on which more methods, pedagogies, etc., were developed, at least in my university. And intercultural education is the result of a process which takes place in a safe environment. And this is important, in a safe environment, allowing the manifestation and development of different ways of learning, constructing, innovating, and transmitting knowledge, local and non-local. As a result of this process, new knowledge, intercultural knowledge, due to that synergy, is created, should emerge. In addition, intercultural education encourages local values for human interactions. And just to finish my participation, this is a vision that we are developing in my university. This bell-shaped figure explains the beginning, the optimum part of a culture, and the annihilation of the culture, the extinction of a culture. To us, the Maya, before we become extinct, actually, we pushed for the creation of Winkro, and we're hoping to move into a tolerated moment of our development until we get again to be protagonists of our own destinies in a multicultural context. Thank you very much. That's my contribution to this webinar.
Thank you very much, Francisco, for your presentation. And in particular, it's so clear for the clarity of it, so we can really discuss so much more of it and see the different uses. Clearly, the audience will agree with me that each presentation could be at least a whole webinar, if not a whole seminar for a long time. And you will see in the future that we are building on each one. So for example, part of what came up in the discussion of the working group of Indigenous people's issues, which is co-chaired by Mary and by Karma, is that we will connect Francisco's systematic presentation of interculturality to its implication for peace. And most likely, we will have a special webinar on International Peace Day, September 21, or around it, to actually make it explicit. Each presentation you heard today has these kind of implications. Certainly, Mary, and each one is so rich on so many levels from the beginning to the end of the webinar. I'm wondering in our next phase, among the panelists, would you please join us with your actual faces? Mary, Adela, Juan, please. Adela, Juan. Our next phase is a discussion among, hi Juan. People
Hi, how are you?
with my favorite hat.
Very, very happy to be in this meeting.
Yes, we're happy to have you. Adela, please join us with your picture. And one of the other things I want to note and share with all of us, including the panel, is you really do have in the audience international representation, and several of our Rwandan colleagues are here with us, and it's such a pleasure. And indeed, when we think long-term, when we dream long-term, it would be so wonderful to have to create an international meeting, actually, of all the different victims groups. And indeed, I'm afraid, Mary and Karma, we will have to have another meeting about colonialism in Africa, without question. So, so I'm very happy that some of our African colleagues are with us, and please start thinking and planning. Now that I shared some of the dreams, go back to the panel. Your last words will be at the end, but right now, do you have questions for each other or comments for each other before we open it to questions from the audience?
How we come together to make more connection and to share more directly the experience between different indigenous communities from Brazil, Africa, and Mexico and Latin American countries.
We will, and don't forget Asia. We will. We are webinar after webinar. We are creating an international community, and hopefully it would become real community in terms of
Thank you.
And so
I am glad that to continue, particularly to get peace in the world. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And of course, there are two challenges. One is time, which means we have to change the timing of the webinars to adjust to different time zones. So when it's Asia, it has to be early morning for us or late evening for us, etc., etc. And the other main challenge that I'm sure many of you have experienced is the need for translation. So I'm putting it as an invitation to the audience to please help us with ideas as to how to provide a translation to all the languages. As Francisco showed, it matters a great deal. And also you saw it for real in Fernanda's presentation. So this is a particular issue. It's only partly financial. So start thinking creatively about it. Anyone else has a comment or a question about each other's contributions?
How about asking the attendants if they have any question? And from there, we can interact. The panelists could interact.
Did you understand the question? Would you repeat it again, please, Francisco?
Sure. It was not a question. It's just a suggestion
Yes.
to allow the attendants to present questions or think or thoughts. And from there, the panelists can interact.
Absolutely. That's the next place. I'm just giving you the first opportunity. Mary, do you have questions to anybody? Fernanda? And remember to unmute yourself.
No, I don't have any specific questions. I just have a lot of admiration for our panel. And, you know, like you said, yeah, it was like, I would love to attend a seminar presented by some of you.
Exactly. Yeah, it's always frustrating, but but it's because it's so rich. Okay, so we will open it to the audience. It's full of thanks.
There's a Q&A section, not the chat.
Right. It's do you see any whoops, anything in the Q&A?
No, I don't.
No, because we asked people to write in the chat, actually.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, it's a lot of compliments. I can Elaine is enjoying this. She's asked about the availability to everyone. The video recording will be reposted on our website by tomorrow, and each registrant would also receive the video.
Dr. Daniele?
Yes, dear.
At the appropriate time, I'd like to just make a comment.
Hello, Tommy. Where are you?
I'm in Tucson, Arizona, in the United States of America. It's warming up here in the Sonoran Desert.
Okay, talk to us.
Yeah, hello, and to my relative, Yate, Tommy Vigayanish, yeah. Good morning, friends and relatives. I'm a Tommy Begay. I am a Dene, or Navajo is better often referred to, from northeastern Arizona. I was born on the reservation, Navajo reservation, and I come from there. But I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry here in the College of Medicine at the University of Arizona in Tucson, and I was really intrigued by all of the presentations this morning. I'm a cultural psychologist, and my focus is really sort of on the evolution of behavior. In other words, there's a reason why we do what we do on an individual level, but also collectively. And collectively, we refer to that as culture. So there's an interface between biology and environment and culture. In other words, this sets up sort of the scene for intergenerational learning. Our children are learning from us, informally, and oftentimes we don't realize that. So my focus in my research focus is really looking at the neurophysiological impact of adverse childhood stress, also known as adverse childhood experiences, and it's really more or less the focus is on the biology, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and cortisol or excessive cortisol that has disrupts our immune system, and inflammation is often the outcome, or more inflammation. But also the impact of stress and fear and pain also affects our our sympathetic nervous system. That's part of our autonomic nervous system, and really sort of there's relationships, scientific evidence that links trauma, fear, and pain to psychiatric outcomes of depression, of substance abuse. And what I'm describing is really sort of health disparities, oftentimes in indigenous populations or people of color, for that matter. But there's a reason for that, and that's sort of there's again bringing culture together with biology. So I want to kind of lend another angle to this issue. We've heard the wonderful presentations this morning, but I currently have a research project, and I'm very grateful to Dr. Daniele. I had to modify one of her instruments, the Daniele Inventory of Multigenerational Legacies of Trauma. And I'm currently working with a border population, a U.S.-Mexico border population in the community of Nogales, Arizona, as well as Nogales, Mexico. And so we're looking at the impact of what has happened at the border because of people moving from the Americas, South America, Mexico, into the United States through this particular community. So it's my focus is really on, again, what happens to children as they grow up to become adults, what happens to their health, but how is that associated to all the other aspects of life, especially health? So I'm a faculty member of the Sleep and Health Research Program, as well as the Social, Cognitive, and Affective Neuroscience Laboratory. And so this opportunity I have now is really focused on sleep, but it's really hard to, my hypothesis and my emphasis is really, I think there's a link to trauma. There's a link to the way people are treated and their behaviors, but also how that lends to the community there that's part of this conduit of people. But I would eventually like to look at American Indian, Alaska Native populations. Again, the focus on connecting the changes in biology, the changes in physiology, but also it's not just that doesn't happen in a vacuum. It also affects our behaviors, our cultures. So I think what has happened with historical trauma is it's changed that culture. We no longer, for the most part, we no longer connect through Hajon, is a Navajo concept of peace and balance and connection to earth, connection to universe, because we were forced, as well documented in our presentations this morning, well documented of the impact of historical trauma, especially what boarding schools have done, of disconnecting language and the ways of life, the ways of healing, mental healing, physical healing, but spiritual healing as well. And so that's really sort of my focus, and in the work that I do. But I've had the pleasure of working with several indigenous communities. Most of my interaction is with school districts, like whole school districts, cafeteria workers, teachers, principals, administrators. And I've had the fortune to work with the Greasewood Springs Community School on the Navajo Nation, as well as the Ganado Unified School District on the Navajo Nation. And most recently, the San Carlos Unified School District. The San Carlos tribe is the San Carlos Apache tribe is further southern Arizona, very moving closer to the Mexico border. But also I've worked with the Tohono O'odham Nation Department of Health, and they are situated right on the border. So what we're talking about here today is really sort of, again, a global phenomenon that is really, again, set up by colonization and the impacts of colonization. But I think it much more, there's a interface between culture and the changes to culture and how that has impacted health. Why are we seeing rises in domestic violence, interpersonal violence that also have health outcomes? But then at the same time, how is inflammation related to depression, and taking depression further out? We see suicide rates in certain places, and especially in Pine Ridge and South Dakota and other areas of the world. So I just kind of wanted to kind of give my perception of what we are talking about here. But we presented different angles here, and my focus is really sort of, again, looking at the physiological outcome. So I appreciate the time, Dr. Daniele. I appreciate our panel this morning. Thank you for the good work, the hard work that you're all doing.
Thank you, Tommy. You're stealing your future presentation.
Oh, you're right. Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to that.
When you have the result, when you have the results of your study, we certainly will include it in a webinar. But thank you also for mentioning the Daniele inventory for multi-generational legacies of trauma. Thank you for using it in your study. It does exist in numerous languages, including Spanish, including Portuguese. And Tommy, we do have an update in Spanish, so be in touch, by the way. So we'll work. But it's been used in Bosnia, in Kosovo, in Hungary, all over the world, actually, and it's now being translated also to Kenya, Rwanda, to be used in Rwanda. So we will have a possibility to present, literally to present worldwide comparative data. So I'm reminding all of you, it exists. Anyone who would like to use it, I'm here. The center is here, and that's why we exist. We do have a question from Jacqueline Murakatete, who heads the Jacqueline, do you want to get on as Tommy did? Why don't you join us? Robbie, would you let Jacqueline in, please? Jacqueline participated in our panel on the challenges of parenting after genocide. She is a mother of 2 little ones. She is a survivor of the Rwandan genocide. Jacqueline, you want to join, or you want me to read your question?
Do you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. My first of all, I want to thank all the panelists for the wonderful, powerful presentations that they did. But my question really is about, suggestions for some things that those in the audience who want to get involved can do, because I feel like personally, and I speak, I think for many people, after you hear presentations like this, there's just so much. It's overwhelming, and just you're overwhelmed by the sense of injustice that's going on with the different populations that we learned about. So I was wondering if the panelists can just share some action steps that audience members can take, if they can recommend some organizations or legislations that are currently in the process, or petitions, or policies that all of us on an individual basis can support and can get involved. Because I think it's one thing to listen to this, but we have to ask ourselves, what can we do and where do we go from here? So I would really love to hear from the panelists about that. Thank you.
Okay, it is overwhelming, because the truth is that question was addressed by various panelists. So Mary, why don't you start, because you directly reported on some, and Fernanda, and then Francisco Adela also mentioned some, and Juan spoke. Just go ahead, Mary.
Sure, thank you. Great question, Jacqueline. So in terms of the boarding school reports, I did put links on the slide, but if you Google that Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Canada, boarding school, the US, I mean, if you just Google those things, you can get to websites that do have specific action steps. And some of it is these reports often make a splash initially when they're presented, but then there isn't what you're, I think, pointing out is what's the follow-up? What can we do to make sure that this moves forward? And I know at least on the Canadian side, they do have part of what came out, not in the initial report, but in the follow-up report, is action steps. What can individuals and communities do to promote healing and reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people? Hopefully that will happen with the US as well. It's very recently reported. But in terms of even land rights in the US, if you look, there's legislation pending. You can look up and see if there's anything in your state, and then take action by contacting your senators and representatives about your wanting to support, indigenous friendly policies about land and extractive operations in those communities.
Thank you, Mary. And it's important for us to mention, you might know that the Pope, His Holiness Pope Francis, has met with Canadian Indigenous leaders, particularly about the boarding school, to listen to them and to apologize to them. And he is going to be in Canada in July to apologize. Also, the center, will hold, and Francisco, please know about this too, on August 9 is World Indigenous Day, International Indigenous Day, and we will have on the 9th or around it a special webinar on boarding schools, on residential schools. And hopefully we will also have a statement from the Pope. But even if not, there's so much to learn. So let me, and both Mary and Karma, the co-chair of the working group, are working very hard on that, I know. Fernanda, justice.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Thanks, Jacqueline, for your question. It's really, really important how to act, how to react to these violences that we have been talked here. I think our panel was about colonialism, how colonialism impacts indigenous populations still nowadays, how it causes trauma, how it re-victimizes indigenous populations again and again. And I think it's important for us to understand that colonialism is about power relations. Mm-hmm. It's about how power is exercised in our social relations, how colonialism was so successful, creating a specific power relations through depreciating, through dehumanizing people in order to foster capitalism or economic development for some, and how it and how the minds and how it created a epistemological basis to uphold these unequal, asymmetrical social relations nowadays, and how important is to engage in delegitimize, in deconstruct, in disrupt this discourse, this colonial discourse, voicing not only indigenous communities that are the most affected by colonialism still nowadays, but all the marginalized groups that are dehumanized by discourses of racial superiority or gender superiority or so on. And I think we have to challenge these colonial discourses, the colonial roots of oppression that affect all the marginalized groups, not only indigenous peoples that, I mean, again, the most affected by colonialism, but colonialism is not just about occupation and control of territories and economies, but it's about to create a epistemological grounding to uphold asymmetrical power relations in our society. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisco. Would you want to maybe frame your comment in terms of cultural justice?
I'm afraid I'm not equipped to go in that direction. Yeah. Just remember that I am here by accident. It's slowly but surely I'm seeing that my work is connected to colonialism and traumas, but I'm just new to that area. My field is mostly related to food systems, the role of indigenous knowledge and indigenous peoples in food systems. And for that, my suggestion, and of course, through food systems, we are also fighting colonialism and other issues that relate to the cultures. But I work closely with a group of that is part of FAO. FAO has a hub on indigenous
Food and
people.
Agricultural Organization.
Yes, and that's the best way. And also, after the summit on food systems, a few coalitions were created. One is the Coalition on Agroecology, and another working together is the Coalition on Indigenous Peoples' Food Systems. So those are the paths that through food we can fight colonialism. And you can Google those organizations also as well. Thank you.
Maybe Francisco, you can send us the link so we put it on the website of the center.
Right, I'll do that.
Thank you. Juan, would you like to respond to Jacqueline's question?
Yes, please. Can you repeat the question?
Yes, she asked about provisions of justice.
Provision of justice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we have great inequalities in the country without justice, particularly multinationals, and also what I call internal colonialism, because the colonialism is not only from outside, it's the upper class people who is very powerful, particularly landowners and also militaries and police, who are highly repressive and discriminatory to the people. And also, we don't have really justice system, because justice is highly related to corruption. Mm-hmm. Now we have a new regime. We hope these things will change slowly. I don't know if I respond your question.
Yeah, thank you. Fernanda, if you still hear me, we understand that you have to leave for the Guarani and Kiowa Summit. Thank you for your presentation. Let's just give Adela, have a good trip. Okay, Adela, would you like to add anything from a justice standpoint?
Well, I just want to say I enjoyed the presentation, and especially Dr. Tommy Begay, who talked about research he's doing. And I do think we do need a lot of the solutions that other researchers or even groups that are working on. That would be good to see. And I think on Navajo, a lot of times we need good consultation to see what's happening, or what are the implications for what's being planned by our leaders, which we don't have. So I guess we do need legislations of how to address that. So we are fully informed of what's being done to us, or decisions made for us. So that's just what I want to say. And I can't get on the video because my videos, I guess the internet is unstable. So thank you.
Yeah, we understand that. Thank you so much, Adela. Yes, the Navajo has had wonderful representation today. Indeed.
Right.
Mary, you want to add something?
I do. In response to Adela, I think that we also have to remember that, like on the Navajo Nation, there's the tribal government, and then there's the US government. And I think one of the things a lot of Indigenous communities are dealing with is the government no longer has necessarily a traditional perspective, and that, you know, at least on Navajo, there's a president and vice president, right? And then there's the council, and with representatives from different communities. But it just, I've always wondered, like, what would happen if the governance of tribes didn't follow a model of the colonialists. What would be different? I don't know that you know an answer, but it's something I've wondered.
It would be a lot better,
about.
I think.
You know, what do you say?
Adela?
I just said,
Mary?
I was saying I would think if we didn't go by the government standards, we would be a lot better off. But actually, you know, having our people going back to understanding and respecting and using the fundamental law, we would be much better off, I think.
And
Mary?
Yeah, Francisco, I know this, you're gonna say this isn't your area, but in terms of interculturality, do you think that that is a sort of a model even across government, philosophies or models of how, what can we learn from each other in terms of coming to more peaceful resolutions and just resolutions and protection of the land resolution?
Yes, there is a lot of potential when applying the intercultural approach, because it allows the building of bridges. Once a person who is interested in working with the intercultural approach opens his or her mind to see, to understand, to feel what the other person is trying to say or to communicate or to understand, or the cosmogony, then it is possible to build bridges. But if the 2 or 3 or 4 of the cultures that are coexisting or trying to coexist in an area hold on to their own culture, then it will be very difficult to build bridges. And the most successful examples of sustainable development, and one of the bases of sustainability is peace, all the examples of sustainable development have achieved this possibility of bridging bridges, of building bridges, because no community, or at least most of the communities, are multicultural now. Not unicultural, not one culture, but multicultural. So it is a must that societies should learn how to build bridges. And for that, you have to go to the basis on how people learn and construct knowledge, because that provides the elements for your vision or the actions that you do in your interaction with the others. So yes, there is potential in the intercultural approach.
Okay, so we have another future webinar on the challenge, intercultural challenges of sustainability. I hope you're taking notes because it's all going to be our work. We do have one comment from Berlin, from Homa. Homa is saying, we are in Berlin watching this important webinar, yet we are under the heavy effect of German police arresting Palestinians and people in solidarity with Palestine on annual Nakba Day. That is Disaster Day, when over 800,000 Palestinians have been killed or displaced, the same date which is Israel announced itself officially a country. After they banned all demos that are pro-Palestinians. So thank you, we have international empathy. Yes, we do actually, Homa. I hope you're feeling the empathy from each person here and from the center. Humanity keeps making such horrible mistakes. It's all of which go from generations to generation. That's part of why we are here for, to shed light on it. So perhaps you want to write to the center. We have an email address, right? And it will get to me and we can discuss, maybe you want to initiate the webinar in the future. Thank you for writing us. Thank you for feeling the empathy. That's part of what we are doing, I was going to ask you for last words, but there's so many last words, my God. I don't even think, unless you're feeling compelled, I think any last word will almost be artificial right now. I think there's so many that came out of this extremely rich webinar. I would like not to forget this time to announce our future, immediate future webinars. On June 6th, we have we will have a webinar on the film Kaddish, which is the Jewish prayer for the dead, about the relationship between a Holocaust survivor and son. And the film will be available. You will all receive the announcement immediately after we get off today. It will be again on Monday, June 6th at 1 o'clock. It seems that's our hour. Today was exceptional on a Wednesday, but so we will have the film. The film is free, is available free for 150 first registrants. So I urge you to register as soon as possible. It is an extraordinary film. I had the honor of being the chief humanities advisor to that film. It's an interesting juxtaposition to what Homa was writing about. So please join us for that. That's June 6th. June 27th on International, for International Day of Support for Victims of Torture. Again, on a Monday at 1, we have a seminar exactly on that, on multi-generational effects of torture. July 11 or 12, again to be a Monday, we'll have a webinar related to the Bosnian genocide. Then in August, we will have a webinar related to the date of Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the beginning of the month. And on the 9th or around it, as I said, we're having a webinar on the residential schools. And we can go on and on. I didn't mention September 21 or around on International Day of Peace. As you see, we believe and we are very connected in being grounded in learning from history and using historical days. I want to thank this extraordinary webinar. I want to thank the extraordinary working group on Indigenous people issues under the direction and Mary's and Kara's direction. I want to thank the participants who've been so involved. Please stay involved with us. That's what we're here for. I want to thank again all the audience from everywhere. Please stay in touch with us. See you on June 6th. And thank you again, dear colleagues.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure. Bye-bye.
Colleagues, I kiss you back.
Okay.
Thank you, Mari, and thank you, Gail.
Yes, San Francisco and Jacqueline for always challenging us with amazing questions.
Bye-bye.
Love you all. Thank you.